Good morning, everybody. I'm Kieley. I'm the division supervisor for our Bartow field office, so not too far away. I'm here with my team today over in the back corner, Destiny and Tyler. They're the inspectors for the entire peninsula of Florida. We also have one other inspector also up in Tallahassee, Sarah. So we are your team to come out to your farms or your educational facility to do your routine inspections. Today I'll be talking to you about the Aquaculture Certificate of Registration and that process and a little background on that process. So first, a little background on how this was developed. We'll talk a little bit about the Florida Aquaculture Policy Act. This is Florida Statute 597. It establishes the intent of the legislature to enhance the growth of aquaculture while protecting Florida's environment. It also authorizes the Aquaculture Certificate of Registration. Additionally, this Policy Act establishes the Aquaculture Best Management Practices, or BMP Program, and it designates the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or FDACS, as the regulatory agency of aquaculture in Florida. I think that was one of the questions on your initial flyer questionnaire that you guys got.
See, she's nice and gives a hint like that. Charlie just skipped past like 3 of them.
Or maybe I wasn't supposed to get a hint yet. I don't know. But so the BMPs, how are they developed? Of course, through legislative action. And they were actually developed through input by a technical advisory committee. This was made up of industry members, state and local agencies, as well as environmental groups. And this is just a picture of the actual manual that we have currently. It's important to note this manual is actually in a constant state of being altered and updated, so it is a living document. We work with the industry and other stakeholders to make sure it's meeting those goals as originally intended. Some of the benefits of this BMP program, and Charlie kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, it does establish a more streamlined permitting process. It helps eliminate some redundant permitting and licensing requirements. It is important to note there are some activities that will fall outside the scope of what our permit covers, but it does create a more streamlined process than what was originally or previously in place.
Sorry, can you project a little bit more? Some of the folks on Zoom are saying it's a little
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think
Is the thing?
microphone is, I think
I'll
it's
stand
right
here.
next to the computer.
Okay.
We won't be able to
Sorry.
see that. Yeah, no, that's okay.
With a tiny voice, I'll try
We'll
to scream.
our best. I know, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone on Zoom. This program also allows for innovation to achieve compliance with the program. Of course, it preserves environmental quality. That's part of the main focus of this program and the Policy Act. Facilities that are certified with the program and are compliant are assumed to be in compliance with all state groundwater and surface water quality standards. It also establishes the aquaculturist as a farmer, and this has really important implications for agricultural exemptions, anything from agricultural sales tax to building permits for non-residential farm buildings, eligibility for crop disaster insurance, and a variety of other items. Some benefits for educators. You'll hear more about this, I'm sure, in the coming presentations. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, we do have a page that includes aquaculture lesson plans and curricula. We have a list that we maintain of assistance contacts through the University of Florida Aquaculture Lab. We have a list of field trip opportunities to certified farms that you can go and visit with your classes. We also have that aquaculture educator share page that we touched on a little bit previously that allows you to connect with other educators throughout the state of Florida. We also work to notify our certified facilities and educational institutions of any grant opportunities that may become available, which is of course always very beneficial. We currently have around about 30 Florida elementary through high schools, which are certified with the program. Yep.
You mean the schools are certified, like certified as an aquaculture
Yes, so the school itself, their aquaculture program is certified with our division.
If you look under tab number 3 in your
Nope.
binder. Nope, 4 in your binders. We have a little, why should you apply to certify your school? Little handout there, and that might be handy to show your principal or, lead ag teacher, or whoever it might be. So just
Yeah.
a little more info for you there.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have to get the certification?
So it depends if you're commercially producing, and we do have some schools that do commercially produce their products, and those facilities would be certified with us. But for educational facilities, we do certify them, of course, so you're compliant with the program, but also kind of a technical assistance contact for you. So for schools, it's a little bit of a different capacity that we serve there, but there are some benefits to being with the program. Kind of being in the loop with all these resources that we provide and connecting with other educators and industry members throughout the state.
Check out that one sheet.
The sheet is very helpful, yes. So all kind of, as we just touched on, all facilities that are engaged in commercial aquaculture in Florida must be annually certified by FDACS through this program, and they must implement and maintain compliance with all applicable best management practices, or BMPs. Some photos of some farms, and Charlie already kind of touched on some of the diversity of the farms and the types of operating systems that we see here in the state. So to apply, applicants have to complete the application. There is a $100 application fee that becomes an annual renewal fee each year. Important for this audience, which is highlighted here, that these fees are waived for primary and secondary schools. So there's no fees associated with being enrolled in our BMP program for schools. This certification is valid from July 1st to June 30th of each year. So that previous slide just shows the copy of the first page of the application, just some general information about your facility, location, the school name, just some general information. The additional pages of the application include a taxonomic list of potential species to be cultured. In addition to the application, we do require a facility plan be submitted to us that includes a facility description, a sketch of the site and the culture system that you have, a list of species to be cultured, the intended markets, and then timelines for construction, if not already constructed, and production of your product, and a list of the BMPs, or best practices, to be implemented. In addition to the plan, we also will come out for an initial site inspection to discuss your plans and make sure that they're compliant with our best practices and answer any questions that you might have about the program or your plans. Facilities that are certified are subject to periodic facility inspections by our staff to verify compliance with all applicable BMPs. Facilities must maintain and provide access to copies of all pertinent records. This will vary depending on your operation, the species that you're culturing, what records these may be. Some examples here, restricted species purchases, sales, and transfers, and we'll discuss restricted species in the upcoming slides. Import documents, so if you're importing products from outside of the state or country, there might be some additional documentation needed there, as well as health records. I believe, as Charlie was mentioning, certain species and commodities require health records, like the pinnated shrimp, before they can come into our facility, so we can protect the industry here in Florida and make sure we're not bringing anything in that we, of course, don't want in the state. This slide is just an overview of the different sections of the BMP manual. I've highlighted in bold a couple chapters that we'll focus on in a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides, which might be more relevant to our educators and some of the systems that you may pursue at your educational facility. The first chapter that we'll focus on is water resources, very important for any aquaculture facility. It covers water supply and conservation and reuse considerations. There is a section on recirculating aquaculture or RAS systems, which is relevant for all of you today. It's important to note that while the effluent volume from these types of systems is typically lower than some other more traditional or large-scale operations, the concentration of the nutrients in that effluent can be greater. So it's important to deal with that and properly treat or retain that. I wanted to note with saltwater sources and discharge, there is a section in the BMP manual as well for this. Saline water cannot be discharged to freshwater environments under the aquaculture BMPs. So don't want to be contaminating groundwater with saline water if that's not already in the environment. Effluent treatment is probably the most prominent section of this chapter, important for all facilities to be aware of. Effluent treatment is required for all certified facilities, with the exception of those that are designated as minimal impact facilities, and we'll discuss that in a little more detail. So it's just some of the common effluent treatment options that we may see at our farms as some examples. And the overall goal here is the same, to reduce that flow rate of effluents from the farm, to allow time for the settlement of any suspended solids that might be in that water, and allow for appropriate attenuation of nutrients that's in that effluent water coming out of the system. So some of these examples include a vegetated filter strip, a detention pond facility where water is kept for a period of time before it can discharge, allowing that ample time for treatment. A constructed or man-made wetland that allows that uptake through those plants and those systems. Integrated production, so Charlie already touched on aquaponic systems. We see some facilities that will apply this effluent water to crops or to farm fields or to aquaponic systems like you see in that center photo at the bottom there. Some farms may choose to retain all of their water on site in ponds which don't discharge or other containments. So this is a zero discharge option, which kind of leads into that minimal impact facility that we were discussing. Our BMPs do have 4 categories of minimal impact facility, or 4 or 5 minimal impact facilities. And this does include any aquaculture system that does not discharge production unit water to surface waters of the state. So they're retaining that water on site. Some examples of how to achieve this again are that retention, evaporation, or percolation ponds that don't discharge water off site. On-site land application or integrated production, so that aquaponic system or creation of a secondary crop utilizing that effluent water. Some sites will choose to use septic systems. We often see this at smaller scale operations or home-based operations, which we also do certify if they're commercial. The next chapter I wanted to focus on is containment. So all holding, transport, and culture systems must be designed and operated to prevent the release of all cultured species. The BMPs treat the species basically in 4 different categories: native, non-native, restricted, and prohibited species. It is important to note that even native species must be contained within the aquaculture system, as even these can pose potential threats due to potential genetic impacts if they were to escape into the wild populations, or potential disease concerns. So that's why we have to keep all those products contained on the farm. Non-native species, there may be additional paperwork or import requirements for these species if you're bringing them into the state of Florida. Restricted species are a group of species that require specific additional permitting or authorization, either through the Department of Agriculture, Division of Aquaculture, through us, or through Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So in addition to being certified, there's an additional letter that you would need to be authorized to even possess or culture those species. And we'll talk a little bit more about those next. Prohibited species are species that the division does not authorize possession or culture of here in the state of Florida. Just a quick overview. I know Charlie kind of already talked about a lot of different species examples, but some common unrestricted species that we will see cultured here, often in recirculating systems, sometimes aquaponic systems, so things that maybe get some good species to consider. We see sunfish and bluegill, goldfish, and some of those other common ornamental species, those angelfish that we talked about, guppies, tetras, mollies, some of your common aquarium species. Channel catfish are another one that we've seen occasionally in recirculating systems and aquaponic systems. And koi are another common ornamental that we see. So we discussed a little bit that restricted species, and there's a group of them. They have additional requirements for containment and best practices. One of the main ones is that they're required to meet additional containment requirements. That first part of this is that the lowest point of the containment or culture system must be at least 1 foot above the 100-year FEMA flood elevation. If you're unsure of what that elevation is, there are maps available online that can show you what that elevation is in the area that you're located. These containment systems must be designed to prevent the release of all life stages of that cultured product. And these photos down here, you can just see some examples of how some farms have implemented this. So for this big blue tank, they have basically kind of like a cast net draped over it to prevent escape by jumping. Some species are more prone to potentially jump out of the system. And the other photo there, it's kind of hard to see, but it is a fine mesh screen over an outflow standpipe. So the outflow from that system, you want to make sure those species aren't going to get sucked in to the outflow of the system. So just some ideas of how to achieve that additional containment. In addition to the containment, there are some additional sales and record keeping requirements for restricted species. The live sale or transfer of a restricted species is limited to individuals that are specifically authorized by FDACS or FWC, like we mentioned before. Facilities must maintain these records for any purchases, sales, or transfers of live restricted species for at least 2 years. That photo on the bottom looks kind of like a lobster. I don't know if anyone's familiar with these or has seen them. Do you know what this is? Yes, so this is the Australian red claw crayfish. So this is something that we occasionally see here at our farms. Of course, it needs that specific authorization through us or FWC to possess those, but they can get rather large, almost like a small lobster. And they're pretty neat. So in addition to that restricted containment that we discussed already, there are some species that require additional specific containment requirements that's species specific. So that red claw crayfish we just talked about, those can only be cultured in indoor tank recirculating systems. So they cannot be in open ponds out in the environment where they could potentially escape and crawl out and get into the wild populations of crayfish we have here. Another common species, restricted species that we see throughout the state is tilapia. I'm sure most of you have probably encountered a tilapia either live or on your plate at some point. There are 4 species in the state of Florida that can be cultured and possessed. There are many other species which cannot be possessed here in Florida, but the ones you can potentially have are blue, Nile, Wami, and Mozambique, or any hybrid of just those 4. But it's important to note that the restrictions and regulations do vary by these species depending on where you are located in the state. So just looking at this map of Florida real quick, you will note that blue diagonal line across the panhandle. So everything from Jefferson County and west, all of that area, those 4 species are all considered restricted. So if you wanted to obtain or culture those species, you would need that additional special authorization that we could issue to possess those if you meet those containment and other BMP requirements. Everything south down through the peninsula, just the Wami and the Mozambique tilapia are considered restricted. So just a little difference there to be aware of. So that's pretty much a general overview of the BMPs. If you have any questions.
So I'm gonna step in for a second because I know we're gonna have a lot of questions about how does this relate to my system that I'm getting? How does this relate to my school? I'm just reading all your minds. We will talk about this when we build the systems, but you are all dealing with a recirculating aquaponic system. So your effluent's gonna be very minimal. We're gonna be dealing with very closed systems. If some of you are putting them inside, which we're hoping a lot of you are putting them inside, it'll also help with a lot of these restrictions. We are gonna recommend tilapia. That's what we raised in the Panhandle, where it said all of them are restricted. That's what she's for. That's what she's for. So we can get you, we'll hook you up with Kieley if you want to certify your school. We can get you those certifications so that you can raise those restricted species in your systems. We just have to make sure that you're following all the rules. That's the only thing. I know it sounds like a lot of regulations, but most of the stuff she's talking about is because we have these farmers, we have these massive farmers that we need to make sure they're following these rules. But with these smaller systems, all of this sounds incredibly intimidating, but I promise it's pretty easy. And like I said, check out that one sheet. There's a lot of bonus, like there's a lot of awesomeness that comes with certification. We have to send inspectors to your school. Most of it's just gonna be like, looks exactly the same as it did last time. Great job, guys. And if they have time, they might be able to talk to your students. They might be able to do some sort of, about the system or whatever. If they have time, like I said, I would strongly suggest taking advantage of that. They have to be there anyway. And if you have this small system, it's not going to take very long. But yeah, other than that, like I said, when it comes to specifics, when we go out and do the system build on the third day, we will discuss more details about that. Any other questions for Kieley?
How long does it take to get certified?
That is a good question, because we do certify such a vast variety of facilities. It depends on the issues that may come up, but for a small scale or educational facility, it's typically pretty fast. We do contact you the same day that we receive the application, within 1 day. We'll review your plans. Once we have the plans, we'll set up that site visit and come out to meet with you as soon as possible. So it's typically a pretty quick process, as long as there's no like wetlands digging concerns or something like that, which we don't anticipate at a school. That's a pretty quick turnaround time, probably a few weeks typically.
And Kieley has volunteered to be your main point of contact. So
Yeah, if you have any
are thinking
questions.
about possibly certifying
Yeah.
your school, this is the email address that you need to write down. I believe it's on the Meet the Speakers page, but I'm not 100% sure. It might be worth writing down that. It's also on the printed one we gave you. Lots of, yeah. So you're not going to be the inspector going.
It depends.
It
So
depends.
I may be. I am the
Maybe.
inspector for a quarter of
But,
the
yeah,
facilities.
everybody has their own areas in the
Yeah.
state, so it might be Kieley, it might not be Kieley, but she's volunteered so nicely to be our main point of contact.
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's just 4 of us. So our whole, the whole peninsula of the state, that's myself, Destiny, and Tyler. So 3 of us are here today out of the 4 that cover the whole state. So you'll get a chance to meet most of us. But yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Myself or my team will help you out, or our inspector up in the Panhandle if you're up in that region as well. But of course, if you have questions, and I agree with Katrina, it may sound more daunting than it really is. There is a lot of rules and regulations, but for an educational facility, a recirculating tank system that's not discharging off site, we do have facilities that do discharge to canals that lead off site. And so that's why all these regulations are in place. So it is typically pretty simple to meet these requirements.
My school was certified.
Okay.
And we used to go, through the Mozambique,
Mhm.
the Boreas and Addictive.
Okay.
But since after Katrina, it was destroyed.
Hmm.
They have never, recertified. Do I have to
Okay.
go through the entire rules again?
You would just have to reapply. Since you've been in the system before, we do have all that information. It doesn't get, wiped away, so we can see what it previously was. So it would just be reapplying with that application, just recertifying basically that system that might need to be rebuilt. But you're familiar with the process.
And it do probably, probably invite you on, okay, we're going to build a new facility
Mhm.
starting next April.
Okay.
And in terms of the discharge of the effluent and what have you,
Mhm.
would we invite you to look at the facility before we start building?
We definitely encourage providing us those plans. So even if you're able to email or give us a call and we can discuss, we can chat with the inspector who goes down to the area if he happens to be around and have time before the application comes in, then potentially, but we definitely would want to talk with you about your plans so we can help guide you to see if they would meet the requirements. We definitely encourage that. So yeah, it'd be great to have you back in the program.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.